Welcome back to our channel NPA Discovery, a place where we dive deep into the lives of those whose stories still echo through music, time, and memory. Today, we're uncovering one of rock's most haunting chapters, the life and legacy of Chris Cornell, the man whose voice could shake the heavens, yet whose heart carried the weight of every note he sang. If you've ever been moved by songs like Black Hole Sun, Like a Stone, or Fell on Black Days, then you already know, Chris Cornell wasn't just a singer. He was a storyteller of pain, redemption, and everything in between. But behind that incredible voice was a battle, one that few truly understood, and one that ended far too soon. So before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, so we can continue bringing you stories that matter, stories that remind us why music heals, even when it hurts. Chris Cornell's story isn't just about fame or tragedy, it's about human fragility and the relentless search for peace. Born Christopher John Boyle on July 20, 1964, in Seattle, Washington, Chris grew up in a house filled with contradictions. His mother, Karen Cornell, was a psychic and a deeply intuitive woman, while his father, Edward Boyle, was a Catholic and an engineer, practical, stoic, and strict. When their marriage crumbled, Chris and his siblings dropped their father's surname and adopted their mother's, Cornell. It may seem like a small act, but symbolically, it was huge. Chris wasn't just changing his name, he was trying to rewrite his story. He struggled early on to find his place in the world. Catholic school didn't suit him. He asked too many questions, doubted the lessons, and clashed with authority. Eventually, his mother pulled him out before he could be expelled. From there, life became unpredictable, filled with long days of loneliness, internal storms, and a search for something that made sense. Then, something miraculous happened. One day, young Chris wandered into a neighbor's basement and stumbled upon a treasure chest, an entire collection of the Beatles' albums. He later said those records were like a lifeline, an emotional map that showed him how to survive pain through melody. For 2 years, he listened to Abbey Road, Rubber Soul, and Revolver, over and over again. And in those endless hours, he discovered that music could speak where words failed. But Chris's journey wasn't smooth. He often described himself as a loner. Crowds made him anxious, silence terrified him, and the outside world felt hostile. This isolation pushed him toward darker escapes, drinking and experimenting with substances, just like his parents before him. At only 14 years old, he tried PCP, a moment he'd later describe as one of the most horrifying experiences of his life. The aftermath left him with agoraphobia and crippling panic attacks. For nearly 2 years, he barely left his home. Imagine that, a teenager, trapped between genius and fear, barely able to face the world outside his window. It was a haunting preview of the mental health battles he'd carried for decades. And yet, somewhere deep inside, the embers of creativity refused to die. Music, that one connection to light, was still calling him. Then came a turning point, a small act of love that changed everything. Chris's mother noticed his depression and decided to do something simple but profound. She bought him a snare drum. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a minor gift. But to Chris, it was salvation. He later said that drum quite literally saved his life. With rhythm, he found structure. With sound, he found purpose. It gave him a reason to wake up, to create, and to connect. He started practicing obsessively. Soon he was playing in local cover bands, working odd jobs to get by, as a dishwasher, a busboy, even a fishmonger. He was living the kind of hard, gritty life that would later shape the raw authenticity of Seattle's grunge movement. The birth of Soundgarden. In the early 1980s, the Seattle scene was brewing something different, something primal, emotional, and real. That's where Chris met Hiro Yamamoto and Kim Thale, two musicians who shared his passion for heavy, distorted sound. Together, they formed Soundgarden, a name inspired by a local art installation that made eerie, otherworldly noises in the wind. At first, Chris was the drummer and vocalist, but his voice, that godlike, multi-octave force, demanded the spotlight. When they brought in Matt Cameron as drummer, Soundgarden was complete. Their early recordings with Sub Pop Records, the same label that would later launch Nirvana, began circulating through Seattle's underground scene. It was raw, heavy, and electric. The sound of a generation waking up from the dream of the 80s. The band's first full-length album, Ultra Mega OK, released through SST Records, was a declaration of independence, a refusal to conform. By 1990, they'd earned a Grammy nomination for Best Metal Performance, and for the first time, it looked like Chris Cornell's pain was finally transforming into power. The voice of a generation. When Soundgarden signed with A&M Records, they became the first of the Seattle grunge bands to break into the mainstream. They weren't just a band anymore, they were a revolution. And at the center of it stood Chris Cornell, with a 4-octave range, capable of both angelic whispers and demonic roars. Rolling Stone once wrote that his voice could summon thunder, then break your heart in the same breath. But Chris didn't see himself as a god. He was still that quiet, anxious kid from Seattle, only now, the world was listening. The 90s became the golden era of grunge, and Soundgarden was one of its cornerstones, alongside Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains. But for all their success, Chris carried something invisible, a heaviness that no applause could cure. The shadow beneath the spotlight. By the mid-2000s, Chris Cornell had become a symbol of artistic rebirth. After Soundgarden split, he had conquered the charts with Audioslave and continued to evolve as a solo artist. Yet, behind the electrifying performances and soulful vocals, there was a deep and persistent ache. Cornell struggled with depression for much of his life, a quiet, relentless storm that fame couldn't silence. He spoke candidly about anxiety, insomnia, and the feeling of being disconnected even in moments of triumph. His lyrics, poetic, raw, and haunting, were often cries for understanding disguised as rock anthems. When Audioslave broke up in 2007 due to creative and political tensions, Chris faced another emotional blow. He threw himself into solo work, releasing Carry On and later Scream, an album that shocked fans with its electronic pop sound. Critics were divided, and so were listeners, but Cornell didn't care about fitting expectations. He was searching for something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. Redemption and reunion. In 2010, a new light appeared on the horizon, Soundgarden reunited. It was a moment fans had long dreamed of, and for Chris, it felt like coming home. The band's chemistry returned effortlessly, as though time had merely paused. They released King Animal in 2012, a thunderous reminder that their sound was timeless. Cornell, older and wiser, sang with a voice filled with experience, less rage, more reflection. He also began exploring new creative paths. His acoustic tours showcased a gentler side, revealing his immense emotional depth. With just a guitar and that unmistakable voice, Cornell transformed songs into intimate confessions. Whether performing Black Hole Sun or The Times They Are A-Changin', he could move an audience to tears. Behind the scenes, however, his personal battles continued. Though he maintained sobriety for many years, close friends sensed that the darkness still lingered. His wife Vicky and their children brought him grounding and love, but mental health doesn't yield easily, even to love. The final performance. May 17, 2017, Detroit, Michigan. Soundgarden was back on tour, and the energy was electric. Fans described Chris that night as both powerful and distant. He poured everything into his performance, closing with Slaves and Bulldozers, where he eerily sang part of Led Zeppelin's In My Time of Dying. Hours later, the world received the news that would devastate millions: Chris Cornell was gone. He was found in his hotel room, and though initial reports suggested suicide, many close to him struggled to accept that conclusion. His wife believed medication had clouded his mind, pushing him into a confused state. The autopsy confirmed the presence of anxiety drugs, leading some to wonder if his death was a tragic accident, a split-second decision in a moment of despair. The rock world fell silent. Vigils erupted across the globe, from Seattle to Paris, as fans mourned the man whose voice had once defined their generation. Legacy of a voice eternal. Chris Cornell's legacy isn't just in his chart-topping hits or iconic bands. It's in the emotional truth of his music. His voice could rage like thunder or tremble like rain, touching something primal in every listener. He gave grunge its soul, alternative rock its poetry, and every broken heart a song to cling to. In the years since his passing, his influence has only grown. New generations discover his music daily, captivated by its honesty. Tributes from musicians across the world, from Metallica to Adele, speak of his unmatched range and humanity. Cornell was inducted posthumously into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Soundgarden, an honor that felt both triumphant and bittersweet. His children continue to protect his legacy through the Chris and Vicky Cornell Foundation, supporting vulnerable youth and promoting mental health awareness. Even in death, Chris continues to give. The man behind the music. Beneath the fame, Chris Cornell was a gentle soul, intelligent, introspective, and deeply kind. Friends described him as a man who could light up a room and yet often preferred solitude. He was a devoted husband, a loving father, and an artist who never stopped evolving. His story is one of brilliance and fragility, proof that even the most powerful voices can tremble in silence. But perhaps Chris wouldn't want us to remember his final moment. He'd want us to remember the fire, the music that made us feel alive, the songs that whispered, "You are not alone." And that's how Chris Cornell will always live, in the echo of a voice that refuses to fade.